Well, hello everyone. It is so good to see you. My name is Pastor Jason, and I'm one of the pastors here at Hope Church. And I want to welcome you this morning to our Hope Online service. I want to welcome you on not just a typical day, but a special day. Today is Mother's Day, and it's a day that we reflect on just the impact that so many mothers and so many women have had on our lives. And it's just a great privilege to do that. And so we just want to thank you for all that you have done for us, all that you continue to do for us, and the way that so many of you just invest your lives in the next generation. And so we thank the Lord for you and for your presence in our lives as well. This afternoon I was reading about the difficulties of motherhood, particularly in this year of COVID-19. I was reading one article, in fact, in the USA Today, that was sharing about how mothers, about 70% of mothers are working, and yet in the midst of working and raising children at the same time, mothers this year have had to work from home, and with so many daycares closing and preschool closing, and students having to do learning from the house, so many mothers have found themselves in positions that they either had to leave their job in order to care for those in the home, or they had to find a way to be both, to be the mother, to be the school teacher, to be the child's companion, and just the manager of everything that's going on. And so if motherhood in general is challenging yet rewarding on any year, especially during the year of COVID-19, our mothers have really done a phenomenal job, and we want to thank you for that. I was reading some statistics in the same article. They said that 6 out of 10 mothers recognize that they do the majority of the work within the family, and then it's amazingly. Only 9% of people said that they actually did less work in the family than everyone else. And so I'm not sure if that's an accurate. I'm not sure if it's an accurate measure. To me, it seems about 9% of women are just being bashful about how much they actually do. But we recognize there's so much to be done, and we're just so thankful for all that's done and just the joy and influence that's brought with it. I was curious. I said, look, as we get to the end of chapter 3 in Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, Paul is talking to the church in Thessalonica, and he's encouraging them to stay engaged. He wants them to stay engaged because very much like the end of a school year, people in Thessalonica had basically began to put themselves on autopilot. And so I began thinking about that and just the challenges of being a parent, and how so many times one of the things that parents have to do is they have to keep people engaged, keep family members engaged into doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing. And sometimes that's not the easiest thing to do. Parents not only have to do everything they're supposed to do, but they have to make sure that everything else gets done by people sometimes that aren't all that motivated. So I said, wait a minute, I wonder if there's a way that I can look at this passage today and I can speak it as if Paul were saying it, that we can look and see how Paul's instruction to the church in Thessalonica is similar to the instruction that parents give their children, in particular that mothers give their children. And so what I did is I Googled, I said, what is it? I Googled this. I said, what is it that new mothers wish they could say but don't feel they have the ability to say? And especially in the year of COVID, you all can imagine some of the things that I saw. But suffice it to say that we gather from it that our mothers are always unappreciated and always putting the needs of the family first. And so we're grateful for that. So the question we get to this passage is, how does Paul deal with this group of believers that have kind of checked out. The return of Jesus was coming. And so because the return of Jesus is coming in the city of Thessalonica, they knew Jesus was coming. They thought that he was going to come immediately. And so what they did is they did what a lot of people throughout history have done. They sold all their possessions. They went to a mountain and they waited. Waited and waited. And when Jesus did not come, they didn't quite know what to do. That's what's happened throughout history. In fact, it happened here in the United States in the 1840s in particular. But the Thessalonians, those in Thessalonica, the Thessalonians, they were tempted because of the return of Jesus to do less, not do more. And so Paul has to write to them, and he basically has to write to them from the attitude of a parent to tell them that, listen, if in some ways, because Jesus is coming, that ought to encourage us to do more, not do less. That because the finish line is closer, we ought to run harder, not run lighter. Because we're nearing the end, that ought to encourage us to be more faithful, not less faithful. And I believe that because these believers were in this community, and in the community there were those that were being idle, those that were being lazy, Paul encourages them on how to respond to Christians, to God's people that have become disengaged. And so let me kind of word some things Paul says in here, the way that that many parents, I think, may word them. The first thing Paul says to the community, with those in it that are on autopilot, is he basically says, if I can paraphrase it, Paul is saying this: being lazy is not how we raised you. That's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, you saw from us what the example of hard work is. And so therefore, our hard work ought to cause you to work harder, not be lazy. Let me show you how he words it here. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, beginning in verse 6. Paul says, now we command you, brothers, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from a brother walking in idleness and not in accord with the traditions that you receive from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us, because we were not idle when we were with you, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with toil and labor we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. It was not because we do not have the right to give you in ourselves an example to imitate. Paul is saying, listen, when you look back at the way that we were among you, we worked hard. We toiled hard. We set an example. And so he says, if you saw us working hard among you, that ought to encourage you to work hard among others. Parents that work hard inspire children to work hard. And usually, as a general rule, you will rarely see a child that will outwork his parents or her parents. But Paul here says, listen, when we were among you, we set an example for you to imitate. And sometimes we kind of can live in a culture where we look down on hard work. Didn't always used to be that way, but nowadays you can turn on the television, and on any time you can see somebody with a reality show with a life that they don't do anything other than they're just famous for being famous and rich for being rich. Paul says that's not how we raised you. We raised you to work hard and to be the best, I would say, that we can be. In Genesis chapter 2, we see Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, God creates the heavens and the earth, and He creates mankind, and He places mankind in the garden, and He gives Adam and Eve the job, the work, the responsibility of tending the garden. This was before Adam and Eve sinned, which means this, that work in the very beginning was a blessing and not a burden. It wasn't until Adam and Eve sinned in Genesis chapter 3 that work became toilsome, that the ground became difficult to till, that crops became difficult to plant and harvest. Work was always designed to be a blessing by God, and it was not until the fall of man, that the fall of mankind, that we began looking at work as something to be avoided and something to be painful. Martin Luther made the statement that when we serve God, that when we serve God vocationally, that when we serve God by planting crops or by making shoes. In fact, Luther used the cobbler as an example. That when a shoemaker makes his shoes, he's doing something to glorify God. That he provides a service for those around him. That he provides the ability for people to stand and work and get around. He does something to contribute to the good of all humanity. And at the same time when he does that, he glorifies God and he uses his gifts. One of the things that I'm convinced of is I'm convinced God has created all of us to serve Him and to enjoy it and to do so with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, and all our strength. And the fact that God is our Father, the fact that He is returning, encourages us to work harder and to serve Him more, not serve Him less. So I believe if Paul were to be writing this, I believe the first thing he would say is remember how we raised you. The second thing I think that Paul would say, if to sort of paraphrase what he's saying right here, is I believe that Paul would say, pull your own weight. Pull your own weight. He says in verse 11, he says, we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Such persons we commend and encourage in the Lord to do their own work quietly and to earn their own living. You've probably heard me say this before, but I'm convinced that everybody in life is either a fountain or a drain. That they add value to the relationship or they drain time and energy and emotional resources out of the relationship. In your family, in your church, in your office, in your marriage, on your team, wherever you are either a fountain adding life to the organization, or you are a drain depleting resources. And listen, we know that there are times that we can't do all that we want to do. We know that there are times in life that we are more productive than others. We know that not everybody has the same amount of time, not the same amount of energy, not the same skill set, not the same opportunity. We know all those things, but as a general rule, Paul seems to be saying here that you and I ought to do everything we can do so that we're a blessing to people and not a burden. Let me show you where he shows this elsewhere. In Galatians 6, verses 1 through 5, Paul says something very similar that seems contradictory. Listen to what he says. He says, brother, if anyone of you is caught as a transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, but keep watch over yourselves lest you be tempted. Then he says this, verse 2. He says, bear one another's burdens. He says to bear the burdens of one another, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own load, and then have reason to believe that he will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. Verse 5, for each one will have to bear his own load. Wait, that doesn't seem to make sense at first. In verse 2, Paul says, bear one another's burdens. And then in verse 5, Paul says, everyone should carry his own load. Well, the difference is that a burden and a load is not the same thing. We're commanded to bear burdens of one another. Our burdens are the things that we cannot carry on our own, that we need someone else to come alongside us and to help us. Paul says here that we ought to bear the burdens of one another. But he also says in verse 5 that everybody has their own load. It may not be the same, it may not be exactly the same, but you and I all have something that we can carry. Paul says that all of us are to carry our own load. But the things that we cannot carry on our own, the burdens that we cannot carry on our own, that you and I ought to share with one another. So Paul is saying to these believers that have kind of checked out, that they're waiting on Jesus to come, and so therefore they're not doing anything. Paul is saying, wait a minute, that's number one, that's not how we taught you. But number two, don't be one of those individuals that doesn't pull their own weight. And Paul says a third thing when he gets here. Not just that that we are supposed to follow the imitation of Paul. Not just that we are supposed to not just that we're supposed to follow the imitation of Paul. Not just that we are supposed to carry our own weight, but he says here that we're to mind our own business. You see how Paul says it here? He says, for we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Paul says here that the problem is that there are some people that are more concerned with what everybody else is doing rather than what they're supposed to be doing themselves. Paul says some people are concerned about work. In fact, work fascinates them. It fascinates them so much that they are watching the work of everyone else rather than doing the work that they're supposed to be doing themselves. They're not engaged. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They are they're finding themselves, because their hands are not occupied, they're finding themselves getting involved in things that they have no business getting involved in. That's why one of the challenges of a great parent is to find opportunities and create space and provide resources so that children can be engaged in the things that they ought to be engaged in, and in so doing avoid a lot of things they ought to be avoiding. And the funny thing is that goes throughout life. We see it in children, we see it in the corporate world, we see it in the church, we see it on athletic teams, we see it in classrooms, that those that are not engaged doing what they ought to be doing always seem to find themselves involved in something that they ought not to be doing. Paul uses a play on words here. He basically says, and it translates very well in the English, he basically says they're not busy at work, they're busybodies. They're always more concerned with what everybody else is doing than what they ought to be doing. Paul seems to say that we have a problem here. That there is a group of people that sort of have just checked out. And Paul's saying that's not how we raised you. And you're not pulling your weight, and you need to mind your own business. That's what Paul seems to be saying. And I believe that's probably as relevant today as it was even back then. So how do we respond? Specifically, how do we respond to people that are not engaged? How do we, and family members and church members and those loved ones close, how do we respond to people that sort of fit this description that Paul has? Well, the first thing there's three things that we see in here. Number one, Paul says, don't grow weary. Verse 13, he says, but as for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. Paul's saying it's easy. It would be easy to get tired. It would be easy to get discouraged. It would be easy to pick up all their slack, and by picking up all their slack to get angry and to get bitter and to get discouraged. Paul says, don't grow weary. Don't get tired. Don't give up. Don't allow this to overtake you. He says, don't grow weary. Keep your strength. Do everything you can do to not be worn out, even when it seems like you're worn out because you're caring for others that aren't pulling their weight. Paul says, don't grow weary. The second thing Paul says is this. He says, avoid the idle people. Now it's fascinating. In earlier in the passage, when Paul says to stay away from a brother that's not engaged, that's idle, that's causing havoc. The word, it's a fascinating word when Paul says to stay away. It's a nautical word from the Greek, from Greek. It basically means this. It literally means to take your sails and steer your ship away from where that person is. Paul's saying, take the sails, take the ship, and you see them right, then you steer left. Take the wheel, when you see them in one direction, you do everything you can do. Because there's nothing productive that happens when you yoke yourself with someone that is a drain to everyone else. At best, they're going to drain you. At worst, you're going to find yourself a drain also. So Paul says, don't grow weary. He says, don't go near them. The final thing he says is treat them as a brother. Watch what he says here. He says in verse 14, he says, if anyone does not say what we're doing in this letter, take notice of that person and have nothing to do with him, that he may be ashamed. Verse 15, do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. It seems that we oftentimes have a problem with those that are not pulling their weight. One of the things that we have a tendency to do is to just ignore them, to act as if nothing's going on, and to watch everyone around be depleted and worn out because nobody wants to have the conversation, the difficult conversation with the individual that's simply not doing what they ought to be doing. That's one danger. We're too nice, and so therefore we don't confront the behavior that needs to be confronted. The other danger is that we confront it, but we don't do so in a loving way. We confront it in a way that we want to punish the person, or that we want it to be more about retaliation than it is restoration. We want to treat that person as an enemy, not as a loved one. Paul says here, don't treat that person as an enemy, but rather warn that person as a brother. You know how you would warn a brother. You would go to your brother and say, listen, I'm scared that if something doesn't change in your life, that you're not going to like where things end up. And I don't want to see that happen to you. By warning, he's talking about coming to him in advance. And even by isolating, as we mentioned earlier, it's not done to punish or to shame, but rather to correct so that things can be better in the future. And there's a big difference between punishment and discipline. And parents get this. Great parents get this. Punishment and discipline aren't the same thing. Punishment says, I'm going to pay you back for what you did, because punishment looks backwards. Discipline says this, that I'm going to train you because I'm more concerned about who you're becoming. Discipline looks forward. It might be the same sentence, but a sentence that's about punishment tells a child, or tells a friend, or tells a brother, or tells a sister. A punishment says that you're a bad person, and because you're a bad person, someone's going to get back at you for what you did. Discipline says, I believe in you. And so therefore, I'm going to make you uncomfortable because I'm more concerned about what you can do in the future than what you did in the past. That's why great parents aren't scared to discipline. Because they know discipline is not about punishment. It's not about the past. Discipline is about shaping and making the future. I'm so thankful, amen, just for all the parents that discipline their children so well. And by discipline, I simply mean by saying, as a child, that you're going to have a great future, and I'm going to help make sure that you're going to have a great future by having a great standard, and I'm going to treat you with love and compassion and help you meet that standard. And to not expect anything less than the best you can be. I began thinking in this passage about how Paul is interacting with these believers. These believers are under the impression that Jesus has already come, and so they're discouraged. And Paul writes him a second letter, and Paul says, wait a minute, no, Jesus hasn't come. Jesus is coming back. And because Jesus is coming back, you want to do more, not less. I remember growing up, both our parents worked. And so one of the things that we recognize is when our parents we got home from school before they came home from work, certain chores we had to do. The return of the parents did not cause us to be lazy so that the parents could do the chores when they got home. The impending return of my parents caused us actually to work much harder. Not in order to get their love, but because we had it. Because we would know when the parents come home, they would either ask us why we did not do what we were supposed to do, or they would say to us, well done. The return of Jesus encourages us to be engaged. When life gets difficult, the return of Jesus causes us to want to be more involved. Causes us to want to be a fountain in our family, in our church, in our home, in our marriage. It ought to cause us as children to be fountains for our parents and not drains all the time. And it encourages our parents and us as parents to not grow weary, to not just not grow weary, but to avoid and encourage our children to avoid idleness, being complacent idleness, and having the courage and enjoying knowing that discipline is a sign of relationship and is a sign that we're loved. I'm so thankful for the ministry of Paul to the Thessalonians. It's a ministry that I read about, that we share about, that we preach about. And I'm thankful for the ministry of great parents and aunties and grandmothers and all those that pour and invest their lives into others so that others can be fountains in lives that follow. Father, I thank you for all that you have done in our lives. I thank you for the grace that motherhood is to so many people. And Father, I lift up every single woman, Lord God, that aspires to that. Lord, not everybody has the same story. Not everybody has the same burdens. But Lord, you meet us where we are. You always provide all that we need. Father, would you encourage our weary mothers? Would you comfort our want to be mothers? Would you strengthen all those that invest their lives into others? Now may the Lord of peace give you peace at all times in every way. The Lord be with you all. I, Paul, write this greeting with my own hand. He says, this is the sign of genuineness in every letter of mine. This is the way that I write. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you all. I want to thank you for being with us today on Mother's Day, and pray that you celebrate it as you feel led today. So thankful that you're with us. I want to encourage you to check us out online. You can subscribe if you've not done so. We want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button right here, and by doing that, you'll be able to get content from us in a more streamlined way. And so we encourage you to do that. Also, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us by downloading our app. You can also reach out to us at jason@hopeindayton.org. While you go to our website, you can give of your tithes, gifts, and offerings. You can also do that through our app. You can do it through our text to give. You can do it through mailing your cash or check here to our Wilmington Pk location. So I'm so thankful that you've been with us over these last few weeks as we've been talking about resolve, how to live today in light of tomorrow. And I just pray that God has spoken to you and that God is continuing to do amazing things in your life. I'm so thankful that you've chosen to be part of our worshiping community. Part of our community worships in person. Part of our community worships online. But we are all the family of God that considers Hope our church home. Have a great day today. Call your mother if you've not done so. And we look forward to see you next week. God bless. Bye.
Myself keep walking on. Here's something up ahead, water falling like a song.